morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to episode 2 of Amble and Knit. This is a spin-off series to my main podcast, which is called the Wool and the Forest podcast on YouTube. My name is Daki. I am your host on this channel. You can find me on YouTube as Wool and the Forest, on Instagram as Wool and the Forest, and my website is woolandtheforest.com. Amble and Knit, as I said, is a spin-off series to my main knitting, crochet, fiber loving podcast. And in this spin-off series, we take a very relaxed approach. There's no talking of finished projects or finished objects and showing knits as such. It is more the ambience that's created in this series is of ambling down the forest path with a dear friend, someone who loves knitting and wool and handwork as much as you do, and just catching up as you walk along the forest path, catching up about your knitting, about your personal lives, about what's happening in your makers' lives, about your thoughts and opinions and things that are sitting in your heart that only other knitters or fibery people might get. And it's just a little bit of a way to, connect a little bit more intimately and a little bit more deeply than you can in a standard podcast episode. So welcome everyone. At the outset, I would like to take a moment, as usual, to bring my hands together and thank my dear patrons, without whom these videos or any of the work I do on social media would not be possible. Thank you so much for your continuing support of the podcast and of this series and all videos that I put out. And if you enjoy any of my videos on the channel, if you are a new subscriber, welcome. I'm so glad you found me. I hope that you will, if you enjoy the work, you will consider either a one-time donation or a continuing donation, continuing pledge on my Patreon, where my members get to see me pop in a few more times in a month than I do on YouTube. And it is by far the best way to support the channel. And of course, liking, subscribing, sharing the channel, sharing the videos is also extremely helpful and helps this community of Wool and the Forest, wool lovers, to grow. So thank you so much for doing that. In terms of what we will amble and talk about today, it's going to be a little bit more of a relaxed episode than the first episode of Amble and Knit, which was extremely popular and quite a hit. And the comment section of that episode is just a treasure trove. So if you missed this, and if you are a new viewer coming back, it's been almost a year, or getting close to a year, since I did the pilot episode for Amble and Knit. So if you are either a new viewer finding the channel for the first time or the series for the first time, I'll link the first episode right here, the pilot episode. Or if you are a returning viewer, so happy to see you again, and you just want to refresh your memory or just to go and have a read of that incredible comment field of that first episode, you can click the link and find the first episode. And there were so many things that were brought up in the chatter that ensued after that pilot episode, and not all of it that I will be able to tackle in this episode, which is kind of a way for me to come back after what has been a long break from social media, from video making, from YouTube, from everything. As I spoke to you about in my returning to podcast episode of my main podcast, which will also be linked here. I spoke to you all about why I've been away, what has happened, and now I'm slowly but very surely finding my feet and coming back to podcasting. And because of that, I thought it would be a really nice way to come back is to just take an easy amble, a real meandering ramble about our knitting and about what I've been up to, and just to tackle a few things that came up that people wanted me to talk about in upcoming editions of Amble and Knit. So this is a series where I talk a lot about my own personal approaches to handwork and textiles and fabric making and knitting, and my opinions regarding natural wool and natural processes, and a way of relating to my craft and to my making that I want to spread and share with other people, a way that I call of awakening consciousness about our own craft and the impact that our choices have on the world around us. So many things, you guys gave me such like I said, a treasure trove of things, topics that I can address, concerns that I can address, and talk more deeply about in upcoming episodes. But today it's going to be a different type of episode. So first off, we will talk a little bit about what midwinter means to me. Actually, let me take a quick pause to tell you that currently in the area that I live in the Olympic Peninsula, it is currently duck shooting season, apparently. And because we live extremely rurally, right in the wilderness, we have no neighbors as such, but our neighbors are, quite far away. We can't really see them. We're surrounded by forest, deep, untouched forest, old growth forest. But when they go duck hunting, we can hear them. And I think you may have heard some of the shots, and they're quite close by today for whatever reason, close to our property boundary. And I'm sorry, I did consider redoing this, but my schedule is so hectic, so full on, because I'm a mother of 6, if you didn't already know, if you're new here. And a mother of 6, no, well, I guess I am in a way a mother of 6, a mother of 4 in a family of 6. And time is not my own. So I don't see how I'll be able to re-record this. So we're just going to have to push through, carry on, make the best of it. But there are gunshots going on because it's duck hunting season. I don't really understand hunting during a time of abundance. Hunting for survival, hunting because of scarcity, I completely understand, but hunting not due to scarcity is something I cannot relate to, but there it is, it's happening here, and we will do the best we can, okay? So what midwinter means to me is something we will start with. What this beautiful time of the darkening of the days and of solstice approaching means to me. Then I will talk to you a little bit about solstice crafting and handmade gifts and handmade decorations, how our family creates a very specific type of culture around this time of year. And that will be a very nice way to move into talking about what this season does not mean for me and my family. And that also will be a nice stepping stone to tackling one of the things that were brought up by many of you in the pilot episode of Amble and Knit, which was working from my stash about no spend, no buying yarn, working with what you have. So I'm looking at my notes here, exercising restraint, all of that. And then at the very end, depending on how much time I have left, I will talk a little bit about why I have been away from podcasting and some of the lessons learned from my family that went through quite a significant crisis in the summer months of this year. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. And I want to say, if you haven't already got something in your hands, remember we are ambling and knitting, whether it's some knitting or some embroidery or crochet or some form of lovely fibery handwork and a warm drink in your hands. Today I have a very simple fennel and ajwain tea, which is very soothing for my digestion and for my system. We have been nursing colds for the last 7 days. I've had one child after the other, 4 children, and my husband got a little bit sick, but not much. 4 children to nurse, one after the other, over 7 days of a very bad viral cold. And then, of course, Mama gets sick at the very end of it, right? We always wait till the end, till everyone is tended to and gets sick. So I'm soothing all of that away with some lovely fennel and argiane, which is very warming. So I hope you have something in your hands too. I just will take a little sip of it. And I like to leave my fennel seeds in there, and that's very nice. So whenever there are gunshots, I will just stop talking, because I can see that the microphone is picking up, the spikes quite harshly. So carrying on, what does midwinter mean to me? So we are very much approaching the winter solstice at the moment. It is coming on to the second week of December. The days are darkening and shortening quite noticeably, quite visibly. Here in the Pacific Northwest, in the Olympic rainforest, the temperate rainforest, the days are even shorter than for people who live on the mainland and outside the peninsula, because of where we live on the slopes of the Olympic Mountains, surrounded by these enormous Douglas firs and great western cedars. The sun's descent into the horizon and sinking away happens so much earlier in the day. So we have very few hours of daylight this time of year. And all of that wonderful solstice energy, midwinter energy, for me, I find that as nature descends into its time of inertia, of the sap receding from the roots, from the leaves and the tree, the branches, and receding into the trunk of the tree and into the roots, being kept, protected and held for next year's rebirth. It is that time of death and decay with rebirth awaiting. Nature, does that so effortlessly, so beautifully. It kind of slumps into the overwhelming sense of inertia that you see at this time of year. And yet, I feel that it is in this time of year for me, especially in these far northern climes of the Northern Hemisphere, that my desire to become even more active, I feel a buzz, especially as a maker, to make more, to do more. My creative energies are just flowing almost in the opposite direction of the sap receding into the trees. And I feel this desire to sort of push back against the dark, to push back against the inertia that also settles in the human system very naturally, because we are such an intertwined and inextricable part of this planet, a simple outcropping of the earth itself. So we can't help but descend into that same energy ourselves. However, being human and having been blessed by this thing that we called consciousness, I feel almost that in me, at least, there's a feeling of wanting to ignite a fire within my system, to say no to the cold, to say no to the encroaching darkness. And I do believe that so many of the midwinter celebrations that you see all around the world in the Northern Hemisphere this time of year, ancient celebrations going back thousands of years, even in places you wouldn't traditionally think as wintering places, like my homeland of the Indian subcontinent. There are, from there to the far northern reaches of Northern Europe, there are such a variety, an array of midwinter celebrations, which are all centered, I believe, in this very theme of saying no to the darkness, of lighting a fire and battling that descending inertia within ourselves and in nature itself, that all of these ancient celebrations they center around the theme of light, of bringing light back, not just to the home and to the hearth in terms of fire and lights and candles and all the wonderful things we do this time of year, flinging glitter onto the walls and fairy lights and baubles on our trees. Not just that, but all the wonderful traditions surrounding bringing warmth and heat and light to the human body, and becoming active with all the making and the baking and the decorating and all the, things we make with our hands. And I think especially as knitters, this season is a season where we come alive. You are truly blessed if you are a knitter and you are living through the midwinter time. It's such an important time for us where we make the most and we dream the most about making, and brings us even more joy than it does at any other time of the year. So I think for us, for me, that is what midwinter means. It's a time when I come most alive. And it's strange because I was born and raised very close to the tropics, in Sri Lanka. That is my homeland, my birthland. And it is a part of the world where the shift from the shift in the seasons, the shift of walking away, of the earth pulling away from the sun and looking away from the sun, that part is not very discernible. It is very subtle. However, in these northern parts, that transition, that shift is so much more dramatic, so much more visible. And I find that in these climes, I am even more energized at this time of year because of the experience, that sudden and dramatic experience of the transition between seasons. So it is, as you can probably tell from what is hidden inside my voice, it is a very special season for me. It is. I adore this time of year. And I wonder if it is the same for you. Is midwinter a time of increased activity and bursts of creative energy in you, or is it a more difficult time? Do you find it more difficult as the days get darker? Do you find it difficult to bridge that gap between autumn and midwinter going into the next year? Is it a time of year perhaps that you struggle with emotionally and physically, and perhaps the inertia is something that you don't actually find is conducive to your creative energies? Maybe you are more creatively active when things start to sprout and the world starts to renew itself again. So do tell me. I love to hear from you. The comments are, for me, the greatest joy of making these podcasts is the chatter that I get to have with you in the comment field. So please leave me comments, leave me comment trees, as many as you like. Chat away to me, and know that I read every one of your comments and I try to reply to all of them. So that being what midwinter means to me, I want to talk a little bit about all this business and what this creative energy has caused, has manifested a bit this year. If you know from some of my earlier work, if you've been here for a while and you've watched my Vlogmases, or you followed me on Instagram for any length of time, you should know that handmade decorations are a big thing in this house, in this family. And we make all of our decorations by hand. In fact, I have not bought any decorations, new decorations, I think, for the past 8 or 9 years. I'm not sure how long. It's about 8 years at the very least. And every year we add a little bit to our handmade decorations pile. And this year too, we have been adding, or we are in the process actually of making this year's decorations. And I have a few things to show you. And here I have these these things that have not been turned into anything yet. I have a whole pile of these oval-shaped fabric cutouts, cut from some raw hand-woven silk that I had used for my oldest daughter's birthday dress, actually, a couple of years ago. And I turned the remnants into these huge pile of shapes that will get stitched up into handmade baubles this year. And I've added a little bit of backing fabric because that raw silk was actually quite fine. And I thought that it wouldn't have enough structure if I didn't put a bit of interfacing on the back. And these are going to get stitched up into balls, into baubles rather. And I also have here these blue ribbons that I made using my own indigo dyed fabric scraps that I had from last year's shop opening, things that were left behind. And this is organic muslin that has been indigo dyed. And then I just ripped them, muslin ripped so beautifully, into strips, and I ran it through the zigzag on my sewing machine. And it's made this lovely, lovely stretches of ribbon. And I have a whole bunch of them here, which will get either tied around the baubles or used to tie the baubles onto the tree. We have a bit of a gold and blue theme going on in our house at the moment, and have actually had for a few years golden blue, golden indigo theme to our decorations for the solstice tree. So that's something I want to get done this week, actually, to finish up these lovely silk and indigo baubles. That's something I've been working on. And something that has been giving me a lot of joy, which is, not knitting, are more decorations that I have been working on this year, these past couple of weeks, are these lovely little embroideries, embroidered Christmas ornaments. I have a whole pile of these. And, I've seen a lot of these hand felted hearts and stars whenever I'm on Instagram, all the way from November into December. I've seen all these beautiful, sweet little felted ornaments. But I realized that I hadn't done embroidery in quite a while. And I love embroidery as a handcraft. And I really wanted to do some embroidery because I didn't have any embroidered ornaments for my tree, even from past years. So I am embroidering up these darling little Christmas ornaments, these stars. Now they are made, they're cut out again out of leftover fabric. So even when it comes to our handmade decorations, we don't go out and spend an inordinate amount of money to buy new materials. There are rules in this house of how we approach even our handmade decorations. And the one rule really is that you don't buy anything new. You use what you have in the house. You make as many of your materials as you can. And you forage from the forest as often as possible. You use natural stuff that the forest so generously gives us anyway. And yeah, so those are the rules. You must use what you already have and do not buy new. And so the fabric is a linen fabric from a pair of linen pants that were too old now for me to wear. I had worn them over 2 successive pregnancies, my last 2 pregnancies, and they were quite stretched out. So I've been cutting up the linen because it's beautiful Sri Lankan linen, actually, and beautiful linen. And I thought it would make the perfect canvas for these little wee hearts. And there's one, a little bit of a holly wreath and a branch of holly rather. And we have some mistletoe and we have some indistinct, some type of undetermined winter berry. These are all done, by the way, freehand. I just look at illustrations, I look at things in nature, and I just, I sketch out directly onto the fabric something I think will look pretty. Very little, thought goes into these. And I stitch them up very fast. And here we have a little robin. And they're the cutest. These are definitely my absolute favorites. They are so sweet. Goodness, absolutely adorable. Here's another robin and another wee robin. My oldest daughter actually helped to design the robins. She had some ideas on how the robins should be sitting, and she's a very good artist, like extremely good at drawing and painting and all that. So she designed these, and I put them on the fabric and embroidered them. So those will go. They will get stitched up, and they will form a little pocket just like that with their matching heart, and then they will get stuffed with wool batting or whatever wool I have in the studio, and then hung up, probably by either some indigo thread or indigo yarn or something like that, keeping with the indigo and gold theme. And I think I have a couple more that I want to make. I want to make a snowflake and a tree, and that's it. And then we'll have these guys ready to go up. Now, in terms of materials, I'm using, again, all from my stash. I'm using this lovely DMC flower thread. I don't know if you've ever worked with it. It's a non-stranded embroidery thread. It's lovely to work with. Old stash again. Flower thread, that's what it's called. And I'm also using DMC Cruel wool. I've used that quite a bit. This is a discontinued embroidery thread that DMC used to make years ago, apparently, and I got this secondhand on an eBay sell years ago. And it's a 2-ply pure wool embroidery thread, really lovely and lofty. When you stitch it up, everything kind of fluffs up a bit. And I have some DMC, very old DMC that I picked up in a thrift store nearby in one of the small towns near where we live. So using things like that, and those have been giving me so much joy. And there's so much else. Our family makes so many handmade ornaments this time of year out of recycled, reused, and things out of nature that I can't possibly share all of them. Some of them end up in my Vlogmases, although this year I will only be doing one Vlogmas episode. And in that, in a week or so, I will be releasing that on YouTube. So, subscribe and click that bell icon if you want to be notified of my Vlogmas coming up. And in the Vlogmas, you will definitely see most of our handmade ornaments and some of our old ones from previous years as well. So that to me is, so emblematic, if you want to call it, of how I approach and how this whole family approaches this time of year and what midwinter means to us. It's about knowing that we have enough already, knowing that nature gives in such abundance, knowing that our own hard work and our own creative energy and our own thinking and looking at nature and our own materials differently and with fresh eyes awakens and brings forth so many possibilities, more possibilities than we can possibly actually manifest, like actually make. There are so many more things that we dream of. You can make with what you already have, then you can make in a season. So, abundance, even in this time of what appears to be decay and lack in the earth and the natural world around you, there is still so much abundance. There is enough. So that is that's what this season is to us as a family, and to me definitely. So now that we've spoken a little bit about what midwinter does mean, to speak about what it does not mean, that's actually quite simple. What midwinter certainly does not mean for me and my family is the having. That constant need to have something new, the buying, the constant need to buy something new, that consumerist excess, that culture that has taken over the entire world, really. And the doing, not because it is welling up from your own creative instinct and your own creative energy and your own deep connection to the natural world. Not that kind of doing, but the doing that is dictated by sort of popular culture, by consumer culture, that kind of manic, excessive doing. The doing that is I think in our generation especially, that is enabled and highly influenced by social media trends and media trends and fashion and things like that. The doing beyond your means, really, and doing beyond the necessities of daily life, whether it's as an individual or as a family. I mean, I know I was horrified to learn last week, talking with some friends here in our community, that how many people just in this country, in the United States alone, go into debt at this time of year. I mean, I was, having not been raised in this country, being an outsider here, I was shocked to hear it, that in the time period of Christmas going into New Year, that so many Americans go into debt because so many people are taking out loans and living beyond their means in order to have the kind of Christmas that has been popularized, because of the rampant capitalism in the world and consumer culture as the only way to celebrate this time of year. And of course, it's also, going and spreading, it's being exported. This mindset has been already exported to the rest of the world, but apparently in the US, the symptoms are far worse. And I think that's so sad and that's so terrifying in many ways. When you're going into a new year, you don't want to go into that. I can't imagine going into it burdened with debt and burdened with that feeling of not having enough, especially since all these ancient traditions are about saying, yes, we do have enough. We've behaved in a certain way through the year. We have acted with restraint and cleverness and resourcefulness, and we can do with our hands and make with our hands and love each other and hold each other and feed each other and give to those who do not have, and take a little less so people who really don't have and who are really struggling in terms of survival have enough, and we look after our neighbors and we look after our community. Those are the things that all traditions around the world this time of year are built on. So to think that there are people going in to the new year, burdened with anxiety and pain and trauma about not having enough, of truly being financially worse off, it's a sad thing. And I think this mindset that has taken over, changing that mindset, I believe, is one part of addressing those huge issues that are in the world at the moment. Yeah. So for me, this, I think, leads me very nicely into something that my lovely viewers from the previous episode, the pilot episode of Amble and Knit, really wanted me to talk about, which is how do I exercise restraint when it comes to wool, when it comes to yarn and my knitting, and how do I work from my stash? And I think it is timely at this time of year to talk about this issue, because exercising restraint, especially in the month of December, in the face of an overwhelming amount of influence, especially if you spend any time on social media, overwhelming amount of influence to buy. There's so many forces influencing you to do that. Just a minute, I'm just adjusting something. Exercising restraint becomes even more important if you are following this path of conscious consumption. And at this time of year, I find that restraint requires organization. It really does. And it requires you knowing your own limitations and coming up with a plan. So this is where I will talk to you a little bit about how I work exclusively out of my own stash and how I organize myself in a way to do so. So I have not bought any new wool since, I think in the podcast I said it was October 2022, but it was actually, it was November 2022. The last wool I bought was this beautiful Thrive Unspun from Wool and Twine, and I have not bought anything since then. And even though I thought I would have to buy some wool to make these beautiful mittens that I spoke of in the main podcast. The episode 14 of the main podcast is beautiful Winter Birds Mittens by Nina Pomeranka. I thought I would need to get new wool for that. But then I decided, no, I'm going to look at my stash again and relook and see how I can make do with what I have. And I realized I don't have to. So I'm going into the new year without needing to buy any new wool again. And I believe I probably can extend the no buying wool yarn until the spring of 2024 at least. So let's talk about how I work from my stash and how I exercise restraint through organization. So here I will cut off a little bit to some footage of my stash. And you'll see that I use these little, it's a very simple plan really. I use these little popsicle sticks, essentially. They're called craft sticks as well, that I have seen some people using in their gardening. And what I do is I take a popsicle stick and I write out what I intend for this particular wool. So when I first buy the wool, or as ideas come to me as the wool is sitting in my stash, as soon as an idea comes about, oh, you want to become this, I will sketch it out. I will kind of make a plan of what I want to make. What can I make with the quantity that I have? If I feel like it's a reasonable match between, the expectation of what I want to make and the wool I have, I will write out on my little popsicle stick, it's a bit of a tongue twister, I will write out what I want to make, whether it's the name of a pattern, whether it's an idea for a self-drafted pattern, and I tuck it into the wool itself. And what that allows for me is when I walk into my studio and I look at my stash in one fell swoop, I know what each of the wool wants to be, firstly, and I also know what projects I can make once I finish, what I'm working on. It gives me an enormous amount of visual sort of plan for restraint. It brings some very workable boundaries, visual boundaries really. And I can see this is what I have. This is something I can actually make. So with very little agonizing, I can look at the ideas that I've already put down on these chopsticks, on the wool itself, and immediately know that I can make something and I have enough to make something that I want to make, if that makes any sense. So for me, it is my stash plotting, as I call it. It's very much like a gardener would go around and mark the seeds that they sowed in the autumn and that will bloom, or grow in, or sprout in the spring. I sow the seeds for what my stash will bloom into, will grow into, will sprout into. And for me, at least, this has been a very, very good, very effective way of working from my stash and from not being influenced either by my own thought processes or the thought processes of others or visual stimuli coming in from the world, from media and social media, etc. Not being influenced by those. This really helps me to not be influenced and to stick to my plan. Because I think when you have something tangible like this, sticking to your plan and sticking to your convictions gives you, it makes it easier. And so I think that's the very simple answer to all of you who asked about how I deal with stash. And I think the essence of that is knowing your own limitations. That's really important because once you know your own limitations when it comes to your ability to resist influence and your ability to stay true to the commitments that you made regarding your wool or your stash or your knitting, when you know what your limitations are about that, you can come up with a plan that fits you the best, a plan that will make sure to keep you on the path of restrained consumption and working with what you have. It will keep you on that path. If you already have an idea of what will take you this way or that, what will buffet you on this path, then you can come up with a plan that will, that will just kind of hedge you in just a little bit gently so as to keep you on that path of restraint. So yeah, that's how I deal with it. And I think in terms of this episode, that is all I really wanted to talk about. It is such a beautiful time of year, and I think, pushing back against the craziness, as I said, the culture of excess, not abundance, because abundance is not the same thing as excess. There is a subtle but very important difference between the two that I think the culture of the world today misses. But that culture of excess, it is so important to have voices, influences, practices in our daily life that helps us to resist that and to cultivate a new, more gentle, more conscious, more attuned with the rhythms of nature, that kind of culture within ourselves. Because in the end, change cannot always come from enormous happenings at macro levels. Change often has to happen in the human being itself. And what we can control, what we can influence is ourselves and our families and the people who are immediately in contact with us. And I very much believe that living and creating a certain ambience naturally spreads to everyone around you. And people start to, without judging and moralizing and lecturing to people saying, you must do this or you're evil human being. No, I think you must live it and live it as beautifully and gracefully as you can. And that kind of example is a far more effective way of changing people's minds and bringing them into the fold of gentle, conscious, intentional, deliberate living that is so much friendlier to the earth and friendlier to the world around us, and friendlier in terms of creating a more equitable distribution of all of Mother Nature's resources to all the many billions of human beings who need it. So I was going to talk a little bit at the end about the personal drama that is, I'm just going to have a look here. How many minutes have I been going for? Maybe I can speak a little bit. It's really not much to say, but little sip of my tea because I am feeling quite dry today. So personal drama. Well, it has been, as I said to my patrons, my members on Patreon recently, a crucible of a year for my family and I. And yet, on the other side of such intense crisis, of such intense trauma for the family, there's one major lesson that I have learned as a mother, as a woman. And I think all women play this role. It's not necessarily exclusive just to mothers. As a woman, whoever you're in relationship with, whether it's your children or your husband or your partners or your lovers or your colleagues or your, anything at all, workmates, schoolmates, anything at all. If you are a woman, you hold this very influential role in people's lives. I think most women do that. And we, in crisis moments especially, we have an enormous impact on the people around us. And I noticed this for myself, the impact that I had on my family. Because my children especially are like sponges. They were watching and imbibing how their mother was responding to crisis. And the most important lesson I learned is that the way I am during a crisis teaches them the way to be when crisis, when trauma, when tragedy, when hardship and struggle and obstacle will surely come into their lives as well, because life is nothing without those things. It is the two sides, the two faces of the coin, the single coin that is life. Cannot have one without the other. And I saw them watching me every moment, not just for their sense of safety, but they're learning, and they're learning what it is like to respond to crisis instead of react, what it is like to exercise restraint in all aspects, not just physically, but emotional restraint when it comes to responding to a crisis, to responding to attacks against your integrity, to, that emotional restraint is such an important part of managing this system and marshalling all your strengths so that you can deal with the crisis head on and in the most effective possible way. And I watched my children watching me do that, and it gave me even more motivation to be restrained, to be more clear-headed, and to constantly pick myself up from the pits that, of course, as a mother, you fall into when your family is facing such hardship. You are beset with anxiety and distress and fear, and yet to come out of that pit, they gave me the motivation to come out of that, because I knew they were watching me, and I knew that what I taught them in this moment visually and emotionally is what they would take into their own futures, and will become part of their makeup and their matrix, and their coding, as it were, as they go into their own lives. So that's what I learned. That's all I can really say about what we have faced as a family, and that as I feel on the other side of every single hardship, every single trauma and obstacle that has ever come into my life, I can only come to the other side of it and see what a blessing it all has been, that it has all been in the service to my highest interest, to my highest good, and that I can never be resentful for the hardships and obstacles that come into my life. I can only ever be grateful, because they are blessings, they are gifts in disguise, as it were, and that I would not be the human being I am today if I had not faced everything I faced, and more to face surely in the future, and every tragedy, every crisis prepares you for the next one and the next one and the next one, because Mother Nature, this wonderful life force that we are allowed to be a part of for a short period of time, is like that. Mother Nature is like that. Life is like that. It is all giving, all generous. And, we're allowed to take part in it for a little bit in this grand play that we call life. Anyway, before I get a little bit carried away, I'm going to leave you on that note and go and cuddle my sweet little 18-month-old baby who has woken up from his nap. And my wonderful darling husband has just brought in our live Christmas tree for this year. We're a little bit late with our Christmas tree because their family has been sick. So the Christmas tree, he has just gone out into the forest and found a little tree and dug up the tree and preserved the rootstock as beautifully as he can, and has repotted it, and it is now sitting in our house. And later in the night, we will be trimming the tree with the first of the decorations that we've brought out carefully from last year's boxes. And we'll sit around and we'll look at it, and we will be overwhelmed by the impossibility that such a lot of bounty and beauty has been given to us. And I hope very much that you will find the time to do the same. I will see you again in the next episode of the main podcast. There will be no more Amble and Knit for this year, but there will be in the new year. And until I see you, I wish you all the best, all the abundance, all the prosperity, all the warmth and the light, and the joy that this season can bring, and of course plenty of cuddles and coziness with those you love. Thank you. Say hi, leave me comments. I love chatting to you, and I'll see you again next time. Bye. Ayubowan. Namaskaram.